Hi there, my name is Professor Stewart and welcome to English 1220 Intro to Poetry. Today we're going to be talking about rhyme and meter. First thing I would like to introduce are the four types of rhyme that we will most likely encounter in the poems that we read. We have number 1, end rhyme, 2, internal rhyme, 3, near rhyme, and 4 is an I rhyme. Let's start with the end rhyme since that's the most common. We generally look for the last word or the last sound of each line to rhyme. We might have sort of a couplet like this, which is 2 lines in a row that rhyme, but it's not always this neat and tidy. So in this example from Alexander Pope, the gnome rejoicing bears her gifts away, spreads his black wings and slowly mounts today. So of course that's an end rhyme. Now we have the internal rhyme, and Edgar Allan Poe was big on these long octameter lines that have an internal rhyme. Most poets would have taken the dreary as the last word of the line and then bump the next part down, and then you'd have a nice neat couplet, dreary and weary, but of course not. So Poe has to make everything a little difficult. So here we have internal rhyme, which means a rhyme that occurs within a single line. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping. And on in that vein. So there we have the internal rhyme. Now we have the slant rhyme or the near rhyme, which is the same thing. Emily Dickinson was a big advocate of the near rhyme. My thought is that she just liked to push people's buttons and create controversy around whether the fact that soul and all should rhyme. This is a case where we know that she's writing in the lyrical ballad format. So the second and the fourth lines are intended to rhyme, but you can see that when most people pronounce the word soul and all, there's not really a strong rhyme there. Also keeping in mind that a portion of the poems we'll be reading were written in other times and other places where people pronounced words differently. So let's give her a little credit there, but I think for the most part she was doing it just to annoy us. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Again, that's a slant or a near rhyme. Now the I rhyme's tricky because it should rhyme. A-R-E in all cases should rhyme, but when it occurs at the end of a word, it's pronounced a little bit differently. So the I rhyme looks like it's going to rhyme, but it does not. All men make faults, and even I in this, authorizing thy trespass with compare, myself corrupting, solving thy amiss, excusing thy sins more than thy sins are. Now the next thing we'll be looking at is meter. We have rhyme behind us. I'd say the rhyme is maybe the easiest part of the equation here, but meter is a major part of poetry as well. So let's spend a little bit of time on the smallest element of meter, which is the foot, the unit of measure that we use to talk about poetry. Each line of poetry is made of regular, sometimes alternating pattern of feet, and there are 5 basic types. So note that there are 4 types of rhyme and 5 types of meter. We're not going to be tested on this, but it's just a simple handy device to remember. So the first one, I will let you pronounce the 3 words at the bottom in the purple there. Give you a moment. Now, without even realizing it, you pronounce an I am, which is an unstressed plus a stressed syllable. So note that the way I've set this up is this, the lowercase is the unstressed portion and the uppercase is the stressed portion. So the word surprise, notice my voice goes up at the end of the word. Surprise, believe, right? We don't say surprise and believe. So that's the natural, certain words in the English language have a natural meter. Now next we have the second type of foot, which is a trochee. And this is the opposite. Note that the I am is unstressed plus a stressed. The trochee is a stress and an unstressed. So I'll give you a moment to pronounce those words at the bottom. So note that the word meter, my voice goes down at the end of the word. Meter, feeling, right? So trochee. So I use the foot itself to remind myself. So I call this an I am, unstressed, stressed. I call this a trochee, stressed and unstressed. It helps you to remember. So again, you're not going to need to memorize these, but you are going to need to know the difference. Now the anapest we may encounter, but this is sort of a galloping horse sound to it. But a bum, but a bum, but a bum, but a bum, but a bum. Comprehend, after you, anapest. Okay, so this is a 3-syllable foot. So we're going to get a little mathy in the beginning of the semester here, counting syllables, counting feet, and we may, if we have something, let's say with a 9-syllable line, probably not going to be a trochee or an I am, because those are only 2 syllables a piece. It's probably going to be a three-syllable feet. So this is anapest. Dactylic. Okay, a dactyl is another 3-syllable foot. Give you a moment to pronounce those words at the bottom. Sleeping bag, bop, 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 stressed and 2 unstressed. Dinner time, stressed at the beginning and 2 unstressed. So this is a case, not all poems organize their feet around a single word. Sometimes they get chopped up, etc. But in these cases, dinner time is a dactyl. Spondy is 2 stressed. Don't go, last call, spondy. And here are now the 6 types of poetic lines you may encounter. So keep in mind, we have the foot, which is this basic unit made up of a certain number of syllables. I am, trochee. And you may have heard iambic pentameter. Well, I am is the type of foot. Pentameter tells me how many iambic feet are in each line. Again, these are the types of lines that you'll encounter. So we have dimeter, trimeter. Notice the pronunciation or the stress even in these words changes. Tetrameter, pentameter, hexameter, and octameter. Again, octameter is pretty uncommon except for Edgar Allan Poe, who uses it all the time. So these tell us, again, how many feet per line. Now let's look at a couple examples. Here is an example of iambic trimeter. Now, let me give you a minute to think about that. The iambic part, what is the stress pattern in iambic? You got it, unstressed, stressed. I am. Now, trimeter tells us how many iambic feet are in the line. So if iambic tells us that we have these units made of unstressed and stressed syllables, the trimeter part tells us there's 3. I love the jocund dance. Okay, so we have ba-ba, 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 the softly breathing song. And now these are examples of iambic trimeter lines. Now keep in mind, when you read a poem or when a poet reads her poem or his poem, they don't read it in an extreme accent. They, in essence, you're going to forget about this. You're going to learn it. You're going to forget about it. And when you read in this and you recognize the meter, you can just turn off your, turn off your concern about it and just read it and enjoy the rhythm of it. And this is where the rhythm and the music of poetry comes up, is that poets think a lot about this and build this into their poem, and we learn about it. But once we all know what we're doing, then you can just sort of put it aside and enjoy the poem. And so in a normal way of speaking, you would say, I love the jocund dance, the softly breathing song. And you don't really read it extremely, but that is an iambic trimeter. Now let's take a look at an iambic pentameter, which I'll give you a minute again. So iamb tells us each foot is unstressed and stressed. What does the pentameter part tell us? That's right, that there are 5 iambic feet. And notice the separators there, breaking the line into 5 neat little groups. And they shall fetch the jewels from the deep. Notice the word, in the beginning, there's 2 one-syllable words. That works. The second foot, 2 one-syllable words, but now it gets a little tricky. Now we're breaking up a word here in the middle because we want to stick with that pattern of 2 syllables per foot. Now, how do you figure all this out? The first thing that I do is I count the syllables in the line and then work from there. So if you remember back to 2nd grade, we clap out the syllables, and they shall fetch the jewels from the deep. And here we have 10 syllables, and 10 syllables, 3 doesn't easily divide into 10, so it's probably not a 3-syllable foot. It's probably an iamb or a trochee. And since we're not going to say, and they shall fetch the jewels from, etc., you're probably looking at an iambic pentameter, and they shall fetch the jewels from the deep. And notice that your voice will go down a little bit at the end. You might flip the last 2 accents in that last foot, which often happens, but it's more about the overall pattern. Iambic pentameter, very common meter, and it's a line made of 5 iambic feet. Here's a trochaic tetrameter. And a trochee, remember, is the opposite of an iamb. It's accent first and then unaccented. So accent, unaccent, and the tetrameter tells us how many feet. That's right, 4 trochaic feet. Beat the clear and sunny water, beat the shining big sea water. A line made of 5 trochees. Now all this stuff is pretty much going to go away once we hit we'll be following the Romantic poets, the British Romantic poets, the American Romantic poets. And then once we hit modernism in the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of this meter and rhyme sort of goes away, but it's valuable to learn it. And now we have an anapestic tetrameter. So in other words, we have 4 anapestic feet. Remember, an anapest is unaccented, unaccented, accented. Sort of like a galloping horse, ba-ba-bum, 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 like the leaves of the forest when summer is green. And you wouldn't read it like that. You would just read it normal, but the music, because the poet put this time into it, the music should just come out in a normal reading. Remember, when you read poetry, you really just don't even follow the line breaks, you're following the punctuation. And that is our slideshow on rhyme and meter. Thank you for listening. And there's a lot more to come. Please rewatch this recording if you're confused or uncertain. And we're going to be practicing this quite a bit. So it should get easier as time goes.